I'm Deboki, and today I'm going to be talking about what I have been watching on TV during my very extended reading rut the past few months. I don't even want to call it a reading rut anymore because I think I've decided to fully embrace the fact that over the past few months and maybe even longer, I just haven't really been in a strong reading headspace. It's not like I haven't been reading the past few months. I read books for Nonfiction book club. So I read The Battle of Versailles by Robin Given, which is about this incredible fashion show that happened it was like a charity fashion event that somehow actually ended up having this huge consequence for American fashion and kind of putting it on the map. So Nicole and I talked about that, I believe, in October. And then this past month, we talked about the Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs. And that was also fascinating, especially right now while I am not living in American cities. It was interesting to think about. I still feel like I'm kind of digesting it because there was a lot to learn. But it was nice to have these things where I was forced to read, to kind of be like, okay, I can't not do Nonfiction book club. I mean, technically I could. We have taken breaks, and if I didn't want to, we would have we wouldn't have done Nonfiction book club. But it was nice to have one thing that was sort of the assignment reading, so that I was reading something, but I just couldn't find much more outside of that reading to really get excited about. I will say that a month or so ago, I kind of just decided to embrace the fact that I'm not in the mood to read, or at least at that moment, I was not in the mood to read. And I wouldn't even call it a reading rut at that point. I would just call it a pause. It's just yeah, this is not happening right now. And, aside from a few things that I'm reading for Nonfiction book club or whatever, it's just not the moment, for books in my life. I am actually now finally getting to a place where I do kind of feel like reading again. And I think it actually kind of took me telling myself it's okay to not read to get to that point, because it's kind of when you try to force something to happen, you just make it a more miserable experience for yourself, and it makes you want to do it less, right? If I'm trying to force myself to read books that I am not actually in the mood to read, but I'm just doing it for the sake of reading something, then reading just becomes a chore or a job. And obviously there are times where reading is a chore or a job. It is something that you have to do for work or whatever. But I don't want to make hobby reading into a job. I don't want that's the whole point of having a hobby, is to have it be something that you are doing because it's fun and it's something that is enjoyable. So I think it was good to kind of embrace that in the moment and just be you know what, it's just not going to happen now. And instead what I decided to do was embrace the wonderful world of TV, because obviously TV is good. So today I wanted to just talk about some of the TV that has gotten me through the past few months as I've decided to take some time off from reading. So the first up is Paper Girls. This was an Amazon Prime show. There's only been one season. It's based on a comic book. It's about a group of girls, I believe born in, I think they're in middle school or elementary. I think they're in middle school at the end of the 80s. Time is important. When they were born is important. It might have been the 90s. Anyways, they get caught up into, sorry, I watched this a while ago, so the specific details are escaping me, but they get caught up into a time travel issue when they get kind of sucked into a time travel vortex of sorts, and it gets them drawn into a whole time travel conspiracy, because of course. And I loved this show so much. The most devastating thing about this show is the fact that it is only going to have lasted for a season, but I would still suggest watching it if anything about it sounds interesting to you. The characters in the show are so good. These girls are not necessarily the best of friends, but over the course of their time travel, as they're dealing with their potential future lives, and they're kind of confronting that as a group, and the fact that they're all young and they're having to confront weird issues about their grown-up selves that you're not supposed to when you're young, and watching them become friends through this process, it's so good. The one thing that was a little bit of a bummer is I felt like Tiffany got a little shortchanged in the series, because she's this character who's kind of the brains of the group. She's clearly the smartest, and it seemed like most of the time they didn't really know what to do with her, but towards the end, clearly her genius is being built up to something. And as we're seeing her deal with what the future of her genius looks like and everything, it's a really interesting tension. But it's just because of the point at which the show ends, and the fact that I now know that the show is not going to continue happening, there's something just that didn't fully get to happen there. I would still recommend watching the show. I loved it so much. Another show that I watched and loved, all of these I loved. I'm only talking about shows I loved. I also didn't watch that much stuff that I didn't love. I think with TV, it's so easy to DNF that even the stuff that I started that I didn't really enjoy, I don't really even remember because I like watched like an episode and I was like, I'm done. Like, so like recently I tried to watch Euphoria and I realized very quickly that it is not a show for me. It just felt a little too self-serious and like it didn't have a sense of humor, and instead was going to trade humor for like images of like high schoolers boning, and I just like didn't really want to watch that. Like Gossip Girl has the same raunchiness. I mean, I guess it didn't have boobs on it, but like at least Gossip Girl had a sense of humor. So maybe Euphoria is good. Let me know if Euphoria is worth sticking with, but I could not get into it at all from like the first 20 minutes of the first episode. Anyways, another show that I did enjoy watching that I did get through is Only Murders in the Building. Finally watched it. Truly loved this show. I have a hard time with, like, speaking of self-serious, a lot of times, like, shows set in New York are a little too obsessed with the fact that they are a New York show. And Only Murders in the Building is definitely, like, a New York show in that way. Like, it is very much obsessed with, like, what is it as, like, what is that mystique about New York, right? Like, of, like, lonely people and strangers and eccentric characters and all of that. But I think it really works because even though it is, like, obsessed with New York in that way, I think the core of it, like the loneliness of the characters, is done in a way that is clearly thought of like more universally and is not necessarily specific to New York. It's just done through the lens of New York that I just really enjoyed. And also it's funny, like I'm saying this thing about the loneliness, but it's like a funny show, right? Like I will say the mysteries are a little bit thin, like like the ways that they get resolved are a little bit like I feel a little bit like you guys just kind of like waved your hand and are like telling me that this makes sense. And I don't know that they fully do. But I feel like somehow the fact that the rest of the show is like very funny and silly and the episodes are only like 30 minutes long somehow makes the thinness of the actual mysteries kind of work, where you're like, yeah, you know, this doesn't fully make sense, but I don't know if I would have expected this world to make sense anyway. So really glad I watched Only Murders in the Building. Now a show that I really did not expect to like, except that people online said that they also hadn't expected to like it, but then they did, is Peacemaker on HBO Max. I was not thinking that I was going to enjoy this show about the least interesting character from the new Suicide Squad movie, but this actually ended up being pretty good. Like, I was like, why would I want to watch Peacemaker? Why would I want to watch the racist white guy, like, I don't know, justify himself or like have some kind of redemption arc? And I think what ultimately makes the show work, like there's still some of that kind of aspect to the show where you're kind of like, but I think the show manages to balance it out with other characters who like have a lot of heart and complexity to them, and who also like have no qualms calling out Peacemaker, being like, this is bullshit. Like there's something about it for me that works. I would also understand if this is a show that doesn't work for people, because I think you're still asked to sympathize with a character that is hard to sympathize with in a lot of ways, but I do think it manages enough heart at the core of it, and also by being so absurd in other ways that like somehow it worked for me and I enjoyed it. I think maybe what I like most about the show is that it's weird. I think I'm just like at a point where I appreciate things that are weird, that lean into how weird they are. That doesn't like justify all of the choices, like it doesn't necessarily make it good, but like I am appreciating weirdness and being able to kind of indulge in weird stories and seeing where they go. And then the last TV show I'm going to talk about is Little Women, the Korean drama, which I originally had no desire to watch. I have a weird specific aversion to Little Women because it was this book that in elementary school I kept trying to check out to read because I kept thinking I should read it for some reason, and then I would check it out from the library and then like get a few pages in and be so bored. And this happened multiple times. Like I kept trying to read Little Women, I could never get into it. So I think I've watched one of the movies, but otherwise just like I don't know why I just like refuse like on principle to watch Little Women. But luckily Korean dramas, you know, they'll have titles that are based on English novels and stuff. Like I remember watching the Korean drama Pride and Prejudice. Ultimately, they have very little to do with the actual content of those books, right? Like Pride and Prejudice was like a legal thriller. Little Women is about three sisters who get drawn into a conspiracy around this wealthy family in different ways. Like one of them is an accountant, one of them is a reporter, one of them is a student who is wanting to go into art school. Like the actual resemblance to Little Women, the story is pretty thin. The reason why I decided to give Little Women a chance is because I think I was looking at the kdrama subreddit and someone mentioned that the writer of this show was actually the same writer of The Handmaiden, which is the Korean drama based on Fingersmith by Sarah Waters that I really enjoyed. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna give this a chance. And I will say that Little Women is let down at the end. The ending is a little funky. It's like kind of the same issue with Only Murders in the Building, where like the mystery, like the way things get resolved, you're kind of like, this doesn't fully make sense. And I think it's a little bit harder to handle in this show because, you know, this is a serious thrillery kind of K-drama where like you are invested in like finding out what is this convoluted conspiracy that is wrapping all of these sisters' lives together in really dangerous ways with this family. So that thinness is a lot more consequential than it is, I think, to a show like Only Murders in the Building, where you're also there for the jokes. Like, it's funny, right? Like, there's something else, and it's so much shorter and it's so much breezier. Like, you can let a lot more fly as part of the audience. With that said, I loved this show. Like, this was so good. I feel like a little bit of what I liked about this is actually kind of similar to what I liked about Paper Girls, which is I really like the relationships between a lot of the women and the girls in this show. I mean, in Paper Girls, they're all girls, but also like you're dealing with like older versions of them too. So there's like a lot of dynamics there that are really fun to watch as they're becoming friends. In this case, it's them as sisters, like these three sisters, as they're sort of dealing with this weird level of conspiracy and kind of coming at it with very distinct approaches based on who they are. Like, both the fact that one is the oldest sister and like she feels responsible for all of them. You know, the middle sister is a reporter and she feels like a strong sense of justice and a strong sense of empathy. So like her perspective is different. And the youngest, you know, she's dealing with both being the baby of the family, but also someone who like wants to get out of this like situation. Like, I should stress, like, another important part of this story is class and wealth versus poverty. And these three sisters have not grown up with a lot in their life, and so they're now put in a situation where they are being put right next to a lot of wealth, and they're finding out like that the wealth comes with a lot of costs, and that if they want access to it, it will potentially embroil them into a lot, like, you know. So there's a lot going on there, and I really enjoyed a lot of the dynamics that played out between the sisters, as well as between the sisters and other women in their lives as they get like wrapped up in all of these issues. I would highly recommend it, even with the kind of nonsense ending to a lot of it, because, you know, I'm saying it's thin and nonsense, but it's not fully nonsense. It's just like not as satisfying as it could be, because there are things about it where you're like, I just want them to explore this a little bit more, or I want them to like not wrap this up with so many plot holes. Like, there are just some choices at the end that I didn't love because it felt like it kind of unwound some of the other stuff that was really interesting before. So yeah, those were the TV shows that I've been watching the past few months. And then currently I am working on The White Lotus. I've already watched the first season way back, but the second season I've been really enjoying. I love watching rich people be awful. Like, I mean, I'm a Real Housewives fan. I think Little Women has actually kind of got a strong element of that. So I've been enjoying that about the season of The White Lotus. I'm also starting to watch The Circle because, I don't know, I have strong feelings about Netflix's reality TV shows. Most of them I think are honestly a little bit bad, and I think a big reason is because they keep casting people, I think, more for like hotness and like Instagram presence. I'm basing that a little bit on the stories behind the casting for The Mole, which was mostly okay, but I feel like it would have been interesting if they had edited it a little bit differently. Anyways, my issue with the Netflix reality TV shows is you feel like everyone on the show is there. You feel like everyone on those shows are there to be Instagram influencers, and, you know, that's a part of reality TV ecosystems these days anyway. So I don't think it's necessarily bad. It's just, it sometimes limits the scope of the cast, I guess, is what I would say. So I've been trying to give The Circle a chance because it sounds like a really interesting premise, and I feel like if you're going to cast for people who want to be influencers, then I want to just basically watch something like The Circle, where the whole contest is around watching people be influencers and practice, you know, displaying themselves on social media. Like, that is actually like the full meta circle coming together kind of thing, where actually I think I could embrace that. Like, if you lean fully into it, maybe I'll find it interesting. So I started watching the first season. We'll see how I feel about it. So far I've been enjoying it. But there have been a lot of Netflix reality shows where I think I'm enjoying it, and then I get to the end and I'm like, I don't remember anything. Like, I feel like they cast a very boring cast and edited it with like a lot of showiness without actually doing anything interesting. So I wouldn't be surprised if the circle ends up like that too, but I'm hoping that because of the premise of it, it'll actually pay off in a way that's more interesting. Yeah, so that's what I've been watching. Oh, also, this season of Real Housewives of Salt Lake City is total shit show, and I think it's the first time I've really liked this show. I think it makes no sense. It's never made any sense. Nothing about Real Housewives of Salt Lake City has ever made sense. It's the epitome of a Real Housewives show that has been cast with people who just like want to play at being Real Housewives, which is fine. Like, we're clearly at that point in the Real Housewives oeuvre or whatever, but it's sometimes a little too chaotic. But I think they've somehow managed to congeal that chaoticness into something compelling, because I don't know why. Like, I feel like I watched season 2 and I was like, nothing makes sense. These people hate each other in ways that do not make any sense whatsoever. And yet somehow, even though this season is the exact same way, I am like finding it more logical and interesting than I did last season. So something about Real Housewives of Salt Lake City is really working for me. And so now I'm just working on finding like another kdrama or something to watch in the next few weeks. So if you guys have suggestions for things that I should be watching, things I should be trying to give a chance to, let me know down below. If you want to make the case for Euphoria actually being good, let me know and I will try to give it a chance. So yeah, thanks you guys for watching, and bye.